The hallways of Westlake Academy always fell quiet by 5 o'clock. That's when Lucia Reyes would slip in through the side entrance, her worn backpack slung over one shoulder, to help her father clean the classrooms. At 16, she was tall and slender with dark hair that she kept pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her hands, unlike those of the students who attended this elite school, were slightly rough from helping with household chores and weekend work at her aunt's small grocery store. "Papa, I finished my homework on the bus," she called out, finding her father mopping the science wing. "I can start on the music rooms tonight." Roberto Reyes looked up with a tired smile that still managed to reach his eyes. At 48, his hair had begun graying at the temples and the lines around his eyes had deepened over the years. He'd been the head janitor at Westlake for nearly a decade, taking the position shortly after Lucia's mother passed away. "Thank you, mi hija," he said, leaning his mop against the wall to give her a quick hug. "Just don't stay too late. You have that math test tomorrow, remember?" Lucia nodded, already heading toward the arts building. What her father didn't know was that she finished the music rooms quickly on purpose. For the past 2 years, she had been watching the orchestra practice through the small window in the door every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. The official rehearsals ended at 4:30, but many students stayed later to practice, especially now with the spring showcase only 3 weeks away. The truth was, Lucia loved music. She loved it with a fierce passion that she kept hidden from almost everyone except her father. When she was 8, a kind neighbor who taught elementary school music had noticed her interest and given her an old violin. For years, Lucia had taught herself using library books and free online videos, playing in the small storage closet of their apartment building where no one would hear her mistakes. As she pushed her cleaning cart down the empty hallway, she could already hear someone practicing in one of the rooms. The melody floated through the air. It was Vivaldi's Summer from the Four Seasons, one of Lucia's favorites. She slowed her pace, savoring each note. At Westlake Academy, students drove luxury cars and wore clothes that cost more than her father made in a month. The yearly tuition was more than Roberto earned in a year. It was a different world from the public school Lucia attended, where the music program had been cut due to budget constraints 3 years ago. She began dusting the trophy cases that lined the hallway, her eyes scanning the photos of past orchestra winners. There was something both painful and wonderful about being so close to this world, without truly being part of it. The practice room door opened suddenly, and out stepped Mrs. Harrington, the orchestra teacher. She was a tall, thin woman with perfectly styled gray hair and impeccable posture, a former professional violinist who now shaped the musical futures of Westlake's elite students. "Oh," she said, slightly startled to see Lucia. Her expression softened into what might have been a smile or possibly just politeness. "You're Roberto's daughter, aren't you?" Lucia nodded, gripping her dusting cloth tighter. "Yes, ma'am. I'm just cleaning up." "Of course," Mrs. Harrington replied, checking her expensive watch. "Well, don't mind me. I need to photocopy some sheet music for tomorrow." Lucia watched her walk away, wondering what it would be like to have such a teacher guide your talent, to have access to proper instruction and beautiful instruments that weren't found secondhand. After Mrs. Harrington disappeared around the corner, Lucia moved to the practice room where the sound had been coming from. She expected it to be empty now, but when she peeked through the window, she saw a boy about her age still playing. His eyes were closed as his bow moved across the strings, creating sounds so beautiful they made her chest ache. This was David Chen, the orchestra's star violinist. Lucia had overheard the other students talking about him. His parents were both doctors, and he had been playing since he was 4. He'd already been accepted to Juilliard's pre-college program for the summer. Lucia stood there longer than she should have, watching his technique, the way he held the bow, the positioning of his fingers. She was learning just by observing, storing away these details to try later at home. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice when a group of students rounded the corner, returning from the vending machines with snacks in hand. "Hey, look who's spying!" a voice called out, making Lucia jump. She turned to see Tyler Brooks and his friends staring at her. Tyler was the kind of student who wore his privilege like expensive cologne, too strong and impossible to ignore. His father sat on the school board, and he seemed to view this as a license to behave however he wanted. I was just cleaning," Lucia stammered, gesturing to her cart. "Right," said Tyler, exchanging smirks with his friends. The janitor's kid wasn't drooling over David at all. Heat rushed to Lucia's face. "I need to finish my work," she said, trying to move past them. One of the girls, Heather Wilson, whose father owned half the real estate in town, blocked her path. "You know what? I think she has a crush on David. Or maybe she wants to steal his violin," another boy added. "Those things cost more than her house probably does." Lucia felt her chest tighten. She'd experienced this before. The casual cruelty of kids who had never known what it was like to worry about money, to help your only parent make ends meet, to dream of opportunities that were handed to others on silver platters. "Please move," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the floor. Just then, the practice room door opened, and David stepped out, violin case in hand. He looked confused at the gathering in the hallway. "What's going on?" he asked. "Nothing," Tyler said, his tone suddenly casual. "Just talking to the help." David's eyes shifted to Lucia, and she saw a brief flicker of recognition there. He'd noticed her before, cleaning the rooms after they left. Unlike the others, he always picked up his sheet music and threw away his water bottles. "Cool," David said with a shrug, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge the group. "I'm heading out. Big test tomorrow." As he walked away, Tyler's attention returned to Lucia. "So, do you play any instruments? Maybe the trash can? The mop?" His friends laughed on cue as if he'd said something terribly clever. Lucia said nothing, her knuckles white around the handle of her cart. "Leave her alone, Tyler," a new voice interrupted. It was Zoe Patel, one of the few scholarship students at Westlake, carrying a cello case. "Don't you have anything better to do?" Tyler rolled his eyes. "Just having some fun. Not my fault if some people can't take a joke." "Yeah, hilarious," Zoe said dryly. "Come on," she added to her friends. "Ms. P said we could use the recording studio until 6. As they walked away, Tyler called after Lucia, who had begun pushing her cart down the hall. "Hey, maybe you should audition for the showcase. We could always use a good laugh." More laughter followed her as she turned the corner. Her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. That night, as Lucia helped her father load their supplies back into the small closet, she was quieter than usual. Roberto noticed, as he always did. "Something happened today?" he asked gently in Spanish. Lucia considered lying, saying everything was fine. But her father had always been her confidant, her safe place. "Just some kids," she admitted, "being mean about us working here." Roberto's face darkened momentarily before he sighed. "People who have never had to work hard sometimes don't understand the dignity in it." "It's not just that, Papa," Lucia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were making fun of me for looking at the instruments, for wanting things I can't have." Her father was quiet for a long moment. Then he placed his weathered hands on her shoulders. "Listen to me, Lucia. There is nothing in this world you cannot have if you work for it. Nothing. Your mother believed that, and so do I. But the kids here, they've had lessons since they were little. They have teachers and opportunities, and what do you have?" Roberto asked. "You have passion. You have determination. You have a brain that learns quickly and hands that work hard." He tapped her chest gently. "And you have this heart that loves music so much it hurts sometimes, yes?" Lucia nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "Tomorrow," Roberto said, "I will speak to Mrs. Harrington." "Papa, no," Lucia protested, horrified at the thought. "Not about today," he assured her. "About music. About opportunities. She runs this big program, and there must be ways for you to learn, too. Maybe we can trade. I clean her house on weekends, and she gives you some lessons." They might say no, Roberto acknowledged. "But they might say yes, and if we never ask, we'll never know." As they drove home in their old pickup truck, Lucia stared out the window at the expensive homes they passed. The annual spring showcase was coming soon. She'd seen the posters all over school, the event where Westlake's most talented students performed for parents, alumni, and potential donors. Little did she know that in just 2 weeks, she would be standing on that stage, not as the invisible girl who cleaned the rooms after hours, but as someone who could no longer be ignored. For now, though, she let her head rest against the cool window glass, listening to her father hum an old lullaby under his breath, wondering if some dreams were simply too big to come true. The next morning, Lucia woke before her alarm. She'd barely slept, torn between hope and dread about her father's plan to speak with Mrs. Harrington. Outside, the sky was still dark, but she could hear Roberto in the kitchen, making coffee and humming softly to himself. Their apartment was small but clean, with second-hand furniture her father had carefully restored. On the wall hung a faded photograph of her mother, Anna, holding a 5-year-old Lucia on her lap. Both were smiling at the camera, their eyes crinkling at the corners in exactly the same way. Sometimes Lucia couldn't remember her mother's voice anymore, but she never forgot that smile. "You're up early," Roberto said as she padded into the kitchen. He slid a plate of eggs and toast toward her. "Nervous about your math test?" Lucia picked up her fork, though her stomach felt too tight to eat. "I'm more worried about you talking to Mrs. Harrington," she admitted. "What if she tells everyone? What if it makes things worse?" Roberto sat across from her, his own breakfast untouched. "Listen, mi hija. I've cleaned that school for 9 years. I've watched those teachers and those students. Mrs. Harrington, she has high standards, yes, but she respects hard work. She's not like some of those kids. But we can't afford lessons, Papa, not real ones. Let me worry about that part," he said firmly. "You just focus on your test today." As she rode the bus to her own school 40 minutes away, Lucia tried to imagine what it would be like to actually play in front of others. She'd only ever performed for her father and occasionally for Mrs. Diaz, their elderly neighbor who sometimes brought over homemade tamales on Sundays. The thought of playing for someone like Mrs. Harrington, a professional, someone who could hear every mistake, made her palms sweat. The school day dragged. Lucia moved through her classes in a fog, answering questions automatically when called on. During lunch, she sat in the library, drawing tiny violins in the margins of her notebook instead of eating. By the time she met her father at Westlake that afternoon, her nerves were stretched thin. She found him in the main hallway, his face unreadable. "Did you talk to her?" Lucia asked immediately. Roberto nodded. "She will meet us in the music room at 5. She says she has a proposal." "A proposal?" Lucia repeated, her heart leaping into her throat. "What does that mean?" "We'll find out soon enough." Roberto smiled, though she could tell he was nervous too. "For now, we work." They split up to cover more ground, with Lucia taking the science labs while her father handled the gymnasium. As she cleaned, 1,000 possibilities ran through her mind. Maybe Mrs. Harrington would let her sit in on some classes. Maybe there was an old violin somewhere that no one used anymore. Or maybe, and this thought made her scrub the lab tables harder, maybe Mrs. Harrington just wanted to tell them nicely that there was no place for the janitor's daughter in Westlake's prestigious music program at 10 minutes to 5. Lucia changed out of her cleaning shirt and into the simple blouse she'd packed that morning, the nicest one she owned. Light blue with small embroidered flowers her father had given her for her birthday. She brushed her hair and retied her ponytail, wishing she had something prettier to wear, something that might make her look like she belonged in this school. The walk to the music room felt longer than usual. When she arrived, her father was already there, standing awkwardly in his clean but worn uniform. Through the window, Lucia could see Mrs. Harrington inside organizing sheet music. "Ready?" Roberto asked, his voice gentle. Lucia nodded, though she wasn't ready at all. Mrs. Harrington looked up when they entered, her expression neutral, but not unkind. "Mr. Reyes, Lucia. Thank you for coming." She gestured to the chairs arranged in front of her desk. "Please sit down." They sat, and Lucia noticed her father's hands were clasped tightly in his lap, just like hers. "Mr. Reyes tells me you've been teaching yourself to play the violin," Mrs. Harrington said, looking directly at Lucia. "For how long?" 8 years, Lucia answered quietly. "Since I was 8? Mrs. Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly. 8 years is a significant commitment. "And who has been teaching you?" "No one, really," Lucia admitted, feeling smaller with each word. "I had some books from the library and videos online. Sometimes I watch your students practice through the window." Her cheeks burned as she added this last part. Instead of looking upset, Mrs. Harrington seemed intrigued. "Self-taught for 8 years," she repeated. "That's unusual." Roberto cleared his throat. "Lucia has always been determined. When she wants to learn something, nothing stops her." Mrs. Harrington nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Reyes mentioned you might be interested in some formal instruction." She paused. "As it happens, I've been running a small community outreach program for the past few years. The school board requires it, good publicity, you understand, but finding genuinely interested students has been challenging." Lucia sat up straighter. "Was this really happening?" "If you're truly serious about learning," Mrs. Harrington continued, "I could include you in this program. 1 lesson per week after school hours. Yes, Lucia breathed before remembering her manners. I mean, yes, please. I would be very grateful. There's more, Mrs. Harrington said, her gaze shifting between Lucia and her father. Each spring we hold auditions for a scholarship. 1 student receives a full year of lessons and access to our practice rooms. The school provides the instrument. Roberto's grip on Lucia's hand tightened. When are these auditions? Next Friday, Mrs. Harrington replied. It's short notice, I know. Most students prepare for months. She'll be ready, Roberto said confidently, though Lucia felt anything but ready. Mrs. Harrington looked skeptical. The competition is quite advanced. Students perform a piece of their choosing, and our panel of judges, myself and 2 other music teachers, evaluate their technique, expressiveness, and potential. What piece should she play? Roberto asked. That depends on her current level, Mrs. Harrington said, turning to Lucia. What pieces can you play now? Lucia's mind went blank for a moment. Most of what she knew were simple pieces she'd taught herself or melodies she'd figured out by ear. I've been working on Vivaldi's Summer, she finally said, thinking of the piece David had been playing yesterday. The first movement. But I'm not very good at it yet. Something flickered across Mrs. Harrington's face, surprise, maybe even amusement. Summer is quite ambitious for a self-taught player. I can play something simpler for the audition, Lucia offered quickly. No, Mrs. Harrington said, making a decision. Play what you know best. Whatever that is. She stood up, signaling the meeting was ending. Can you come tomorrow after school? We'll assess where you are and what you need to work on before the audition. Outside, as they walked to their pickup truck, Lucia felt dazed. Did that really just happen? She asked her father. Am I dreaming? Roberto laughed, a sound of pure joy she hadn't heard in a long time. No dream, mi hija. This is real. He opened the truck door for her. I told you. Nothing in this world you cannot have if you work for it. But Papa, Lucia said as they drove home, reality setting in. Even if I get this scholarship, I can't play at their level. Those kids have had real teachers their whole lives. So, you've had heart. Sometimes that counts for more. He glanced at her. Remember what your mother used to say? The most beautiful music comes from those who have known both joy and sorrow. That night, Lucia took out her violin, a second-hand instrument her father had bought from a pawn shop 3 years ago, when her first one became too small. The varnish was scratched in places and one of the tuning pegs was slightly loose, but it made a sound that still filled her with wonder every time she played. For hours, she practiced scales in the opening of Summer, pushing herself to play faster, cleaner, better. Her fingers grew sore and her shoulder ached, but she didn't stop until her father gently knocked on her door. It's midnight, Lucia, he said. You have school tomorrow. She reluctantly put the violin away. Do you think I have a chance, Papa? Really? Roberto smiled. I think you have more than a chance. But even if you don't win this time, this is just the beginning. The next afternoon, Lucia arrived at Mrs. Harrington's classroom with her violin case clutched tightly to her chest. The halls were nearly empty, most students having left for the day. As she approached the music room, she heard voices inside. Mrs. Harrington wasn't alone. She hesitated at the door, then gathered her courage and knocked. Come in, Mrs. Harrington called. Lucia opened the door to find not only Mrs. Harrington, but also Tyler Brooks and several other orchestra students, including David Chen. They all turned to look at her, expressions ranging from confusion to amusement. What's she doing here? Tyler asked, not bothering to lower his voice. Lucia will be joining us today, Mrs. Harrington said firmly. I'm assessing her for the community program. Tyler snickered. The janitor's kid plays violin now? This should be good. Mrs. Harrington shot him a sharp look. That's enough, Tyler. Pack up your things. Rehearsal ended 10 minutes ago. As the students gathered their instruments, Lucia stood frozen by the door, wishing she could disappear. David caught her eye as he passed, giving her a small nod that might have been encouragement. When everyone had gone except Mrs. Harrington, Lucia finally stepped fully into the room. Don't mind them, Mrs. Harrington said, though her tone suggested she very much minded Tyler's behavior. Now let's see what you can do. Start with a scale, G major, 2 octaves. Lucia took a deep breath, removed her violin from its case, and positioned it under her chin. This was it. The moment she'd find out if 8 years of teaching herself, of watching and listening and practicing in secret, had amounted to anything at all. She drew the bow across the strings, and the first note of G major filled the room. What happened next would change everything, not just for Lucia, but for everyone at Westlake Academy. The first note wavered slightly, betraying Lucia's nerves. She took a deep breath and steadied her hand. The second note came out clearer, stronger. By the time she reached the top of the scale and began descending, her confidence had returned. This was familiar territory. She'd played this scale thousands of times in her bedroom. Mrs. Harrington's face revealed nothing as she listened, her arms crossed over her chest. When Lucia finished, she simply nodded and said, "Now a chromatic scale, 3 octaves if you can manage it." Lucia hesitated. She'd practiced chromatic scales before, but never performed one for anyone. Pushing aside her doubt, she positioned her fingers and began. The sequence of half steps climbed higher, her 4th finger stretching to reach the notes in the upper positions. Near the top, her intonation faltered slightly, but she kept going, completing the full 3 octaves before descending again. "Interesting," Mrs. Harrington murmured. "Your technique is unconventional, but effective in its way." She made a note on her clipboard. "Now show me this Vivaldi you've been working on." This was the moment of truth. Lucia had only learned the piece by listening to recordings and watching through the window as David and the others practiced it. She had no sheet music, had never been taught the proper bowings or fingerings. She'd figured it out note by note through trial and error. She closed her eyes briefly, summoning the music in her mind. Then she began to play. The famous opening of Summer filled the room, those insistent, repeated notes that evoked the relentless heat of midsummer. Lucia's bow moved confidently across the strings, her left hand navigating the fingerboard with precision, born of countless hours of practice. When she reached the fast 16th note passages, her fingers flew, not always perfectly in tune, but with remarkable speed and coordination for someone who had never had a lesson. She was so absorbed in the music that she forgot to be nervous, forgot where she was, forgot that Mrs. Harrington was watching with increasingly widened eyes. She played with the abandon of someone who loved music deeply and had nothing to lose. When she finished the first movement and lowered her violin, the silence in the room seemed to ring. She looked at Mrs. Harrington, who was sitting perfectly still, her clipboard forgotten in her lap. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Mrs. Harrington finally asked, her voice unusually soft. Lucia shifted uncomfortably. "I told you, books and videos, and watching your students." Mrs. Harrington shook her head slowly, as if trying to reconcile what she'd just heard with what she knew of self-taught players. "Your technique needs refinement. Your posture isn't quite right. Your bow hold is one creative, but your musicality—" She paused, searching for words. "There are students in this program who have had lessons since they were 4 years old who don't play with that kind of feeling." Warmth bloomed in Lucia's chest at the unexpected praise. "So, do you think I could audition for the scholarship?" "I think you must," Mrs. Harrington replied. She stood up and walked to a cabinet, returning with a folder of sheet music. "Here's the proper score for the Vivaldi. Study it. There are markings for bowings and dynamics that will improve your interpretation. We'll work on your technique during our lessons." Lucia accepted the music with reverent hands. Real sheet music, not printouts from the internet or photocopies from library books. "Thank you," she whispered, overwhelmed by the teacher's unexpected generosity. "Don't thank me yet," Mrs. Harrington warned, though her tone had lost some of its usual sharpness. "We have 1 week to prepare you for this audition, and there's much work to do. Can you come again tomorrow? Same time?" Lucia nodded eagerly. "Yes, ma'am. I'll be here." "And Lucia," Mrs. Harrington added as she packed up her violin, "don't tell the other students about these lessons. Not yet. The scholarship auditions are supposed to be open to anyone, but—" She sighed. "Let's just say not everyone believes in equal opportunities the way I do." As Lucia walked down the hallway toward the janitor's closet where her father would be gathering his supplies, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time, someone who really knew music, who lived and breathed it professionally, thought she had talent. Real talent. She found her father organizing cleaning products, his face lighting up when he saw her. "How did it go?" he asked immediately. She's going to help me prepare for the audition, Lucia said, still hardly believing it herself. She gave me real sheet music and everything. She said my technique needs work, but she couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. She liked my playing, Papa, she really did. Roberto pulled her into a tight hug, his eyes suspiciously bright. Of course she did. I always told you. I know, Lucia laughed. Nothing in this world you cannot have if you work for it. That night, Lucia stayed up late again, this time studying the markings in the sheet music Mrs. Harrington had given her. Some were familiar from her self-study, but others were new. Italian terms for speed and character, small notations about which part of the bow to use, fingering suggestions that were different from what she'd worked out on her own. The next week passed in a blur of school, cleaning and intense violin sessions with Mrs. Harrington. Each day, the teacher pushed Lucia harder, correcting her bow hold, adjusting her elbow position, demonstrating how to shift positions more smoothly. Sometimes the lessons were frustrating, breaking. Habits formed over 8 years wasn't easy, but Mrs. Harrington's standards were unwavering. Again, she would say after Lucia played, through a difficult passage, but this time keep your wrist flexible, like this. And she would demonstrate on her own violin, an expensive instrument that produced a sound so rich it made Lucia's heart ache with longing. By Thursday, the day before the audition, Lucia could play the first movement of Summer from memory, with proper bowings and dynamics. Her technique, while still not perfect, had improved dramatically under Mrs. Harrington's guidance. You're as ready as you can be in such a short time, Mrs. Harrington told her after their final practice session. Remember, breathe before you start. Connect with the music, and don't let anything or anyone distract you. Lucia knew what she meant. Word had somehow gotten out that she would be auditioning, and she'd overheard whispers in the hallways as she cleaned. Most of the orchestra students seemed merely curious, but Tyler and his friends had made their opinions clear. It's a joke, he'd said loudly as she passed by with her mop one afternoon. They're just letting her audition so they can check the diversity box. No way they're giving the scholarship to the cleaning lady's kid. The words had stung, but Lucia refused to let them derail her focus. She had one chance, one opportunity to prove herself, and she wouldn't waste it on worrying about Tyler Brooks and his narrow-minded friends. Friday afternoon arrived, and with it the scholarship auditions. Lucia's hands trembled as she dressed in the small bathroom near the janitor's closet. She'd brought her best outfit, a simple navy blue dress her father had bought her for her quinceañera last year. It wasn't fancy by Westlake standards, but it was clean and proper for a performance. She twisted her hair into a neat bun and pinned it securely, the way she'd seen female violinists do in videos. No makeup, she didn't own any, but she'd washed her face carefully and pinched her cheeks for a touch of color. The auditions were being held in the school's recital hall, a beautiful room with tiered seating and perfect acoustics. When Lucia arrived, 5 students were already waiting outside, instrument cases beside them. She recognized David Chen among them, dressed in a crisp suit that probably cost more than her father made in a month. He noticed her too, his eyebrows rising slightly at her transformation from cleaner to performer. After a moment's hesitation, he walked over to her. You're auditioning? He asked, his tone curious rather than mocking. Lucia nodded, clutching her violin case. Mrs. Harrington thought I should try. What are you playing? Vivaldi. Summer. The first movement. David looked impressed despite himself. That's ambitious. I'm doing the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, first movement. Lucia had heard of the Tchaikovsky but never attempted it. It was far beyond her current abilities. Her confidence wavered momentarily. Don't worry, David said, noticing her expression. They judge on potential as much as skill. That's what Mrs. Harrington always says. Before Lucia could respond, the door to the recital hall opened and Mrs. Harrington emerged, clipboard in hand. We'll go in performance order, she announced. David, you're first. Then Kira, Alejandro, Tyler, Nishi, and finally Lucia. Tyler, who had just arrived with his gleaming violin case, snorted when he heard the lineup. Saving the best for last? He muttered to his friends, just loud enough for Lucia to hear. Mrs. Harrington shot him a warning look. Each of you will have 10 minutes. The panel will ask questions after you play. Remember, we're looking for technique, musicality, and potential for growth. Her eyes lingered briefly on Lucia. Good luck to all of you. As David disappeared into the recital hall for his audition, Lucia took a deep breath. Being last meant she had to wait through all the other performances, hearing snippets of their playing through the door each time it opened. Each student who emerged looked either confident or dejected, depending on how they felt their audition had gone. When Tyler finished his audition, a piece by Paganini that Lucia recognized as extremely difficult, he emerged with a smug smile, looking directly at her. "Good luck," he said, his tone making it clear he didn't mean it. "You'll need it after what I just played." Lucia said nothing, focusing instead on the calming techniques Mrs. Harrington had taught her. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. Visualize the music. Feel it in your body before you play a single note. "Lucia Reyes," Mrs. Harrington called, opening the door one final time. "We're ready for you now." With one last steadying breath, Lucia picked up her violin case and walked into the recital hall, where her future awaited. The recital hall seemed enormous as Lucia stepped inside. Soft lighting illuminated the polished wooden stage, and the empty audience seat stretched back into shadow. At a table near the front sat Mrs. Harrington alongside 2 other teachers, Mr. Winters, the band director, and Ms. Rivera, who taught cello and bass. "Please introduce yourself and tell us what you'll be playing," Mrs. Harrington instructed, her tone professional and giving away nothing of their week of intensive lessons. Lucia's mouth felt dry. She cleared her throat. "My name is Lucia Reyes. I'll be playing the first movement of Summer from Vivaldi's 4 Seasons." Mr. Winters raised an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with Ms. Rivera. The piece was challenging, especially for a scholarship audition. "Whenever you're ready," Mrs. Harrington said with a small nod. Lucia opened her violin case and lifted the instrument. Despite its second-hand status, she'd polished it until the wood gleamed under the stage lights. She tightened her bow, applied rosin with practiced movements, and stepped to the center of the stage. For a moment she stood frozen, the enormity of the situation washing over her. This wasn't her bedroom or even Mrs. Harrington's classroom. This was a real audition with judges watching her every move. And unlike the other students, she carried the weight of knowing this might be her only chance to enter a world that had always been closed to her. Then she remembered her father's words. "Nothing you cannot have if you work for it." She raised the violin to her shoulder, positioned the bow, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes came out pure and strong, filling the space with sound. Lucia let herself sink into the music, the way she did when she played alone at home. The familiar patterns of 16th notes flowed from her fingers, and she shaped the musical phrases the way Mrs. Harrington had taught her, building tension and then releasing it, like telling a story through sound. As she played, Lucia forgot about the judges, forgot about Tyler's sneering comments, forgot about everything except the music itself. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, and her face reflected the changing moods of the piece, intense concentration during the difficult passages, a hint of a smile during the triumphant sections. When she reached the cadenza, the challenging solo section near the end, she played with a freedom and expressiveness that came from deep within. Her fingers danced across the strings, her bow moving in perfect coordination. The final note soared to the ceiling and lingered there, resonating in the perfect acoustics of the hall. Then silence. Lucia lowered her violin, suddenly aware of her racing heart and the slight tremble in her hands. She looked at the judges, trying to read their expressions. Ms. Rivera was smiling openly. Mr. Winters looked thoughtful, his head tilted slightly to one side. And Mrs. Harrington, strict, demanding Mrs. Harrington, had an unmistakable gleam of pride in her eyes. "Thank you, Lucia," she said, making a note on her clipboard. "That was quite impressive. I'd like to ask about your musical background. You mentioned you're self-taught?" "Yes," Lucia replied, her voice steadier now. "I've been playing since I was 8. My father bought me my first violin from a thrift shop. I learned from books and videos mostly." "And who do you listen to?" Ms. Rivera asked. "Which violinists inspire you?" Lucia thought for a moment. "Itzhak Perlman and Hilary Hahn. I like how they both play with so much feeling, but in different ways." Mr. Winters leaned forward. "Your technique is unusual but effective. How did you develop your own approach without formal instruction?" "I just kept trying different ways until it sounded right," Lucia explained simply. "Sometimes I'd watch videos in slow motion to see exactly how the professionals moved their fingers or held their bows. Then I'd practice in front of a mirror until I could copy it. The judges exchanged glances, clearly impressed by her determination. One final question, Mrs. Harrington said. Why do you want this scholarship? What would it mean to you? Lucia took a deep breath. This was the most important question of all. Music has always been my way of belonging, I guess. When I play, I feel connected to something bigger than myself. She looked down at her violin, then back at the judges. My mother loved music. She used to sing to me when I was little, before she got sick. When she died, playing violin became a way to keep that connection alive. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. This scholarship would mean everything to me. Not just the lessons or the better instrument, but the chance to learn properly, to see how good I could really be if given the same opportunities as everyone else here. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm willing to work harder than anyone else to make the most of this chance. Mrs. Harrington nodded, her expression softening slightly. Thank you, Lucia. You may go now. We'll announce our decision on Monday. As Lucia packed up her violin, her hands still trembling slightly from the combination of nerves and adrenaline, she felt a mixture of pride and uncertainty. She had played her best, better than she ever had before. But was it enough? The other students had years of formal training, expensive instruments, and the confidence that came from belonging in places like Westlake Academy. Outside the recital hall, she found her father waiting. His cleaning paused mid-task. The hope in his eyes made her throat tighten. How did it go? He asked quietly. I played well, she said. Really well. But I don't know if it was enough. Roberto squeezed her shoulder. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you. So proud. The weekend crawled by. Lucia alternated between hope and despair, replaying every note of her audition in her mind, analyzing the judges' expressions, wondering if she should have chosen an easier piece. On Monday morning, Roberto dropped her off at her own school with a reassuring smile. Text me as soon as you hear anything, he said. But the day passed with no news. By the time she met her father at Westlake that afternoon, Lucia's nerves were frayed. As they gathered their cleaning supplies, she couldn't help glancing toward the music wing. Maybe they're still deciding, Roberto suggested, noticing her anxiety. Or maybe they've already chosen someone else and just haven't told me yet, Lucia replied. Only one way to find out, her father said gently. Go ask Mrs. Harrington while I start on the classrooms. Heart-pounding, Lucia made her way to the music room. The door was open, and inside she could hear the orchestra rehearsing. She peeked in, not wanting to interrupt. The students were arranged in their usual formation, with Mrs. Harrington conducting from the podium. David sat in the concertmaster's chair, his posture perfect as he led the violin section. Tyler was 2 seats behind him, looking bored as always. Lucia was about to step away when Mrs. Harrington spotted her. The teacher raised her baton, halting the music mid-phrase. Ah, Lucia, she said, causing every head in the room to turn toward the door. Perfect timing. Please, come in. Lucia froze, suddenly aware of 30 pairs of eyes watching her. Reluctantly, she stepped into the room, wishing she wasn't wearing her cleaning uniform. Students, Mrs. Harrington announced, I'd like to introduce the winner of this year's music scholarship. A murmur ran through the orchestra. Tyler's mouth dropped open in disbelief. Lucia Reyes impressed all 3 judges with her remarkable musicality and potential. Despite being self-taught, she demonstrated an innate understanding of the music that was... Mrs. Harrington paused, choosing her words carefully. Quite extraordinary. She will be joining our orchestra effective immediately. The silence that followed was broken by David, who began to applaud. Most of the other students joined in, though some, including Tyler, sat with their hands stubbornly in their laps. But she's the janitor's kid, Tyler blurted out. She doesn't even go to this school. Mrs. Harrington fixed him with an icy stare. The scholarship is open to all students in the district, Mr. Brooks, as you well know. And I would remind you that many of the greatest musicians throughout history came from humble beginnings. She turned back to Lucia. The scholarship includes lessons, access to practice rooms, and a loaner instrument of professional quality. Can you start today? Lucia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Excellent. We have an empty seat in the second violin section. Mrs. Harrington pointed to a chair. David can help you get settled. As Lucia made her way to the indicated seat, legs shaky with disbelief, David stood and pulled out the chair for her. Congratulations, he said quietly, and she was surprised to hear genuine respect in his voice. "I heard you through the door during your audition. You deserve to win." "Thanks," Lucia whispered, acutely aware of the stares from the other students. Some looked curious, others resentful, a few genuinely welcoming. "You'll need this," David added, handing her a folder of sheet music. "We're working on the Brahms for the spring showcase." Mrs. Harrington tapped her baton on the music stand. "From the beginning, everyone, and Lucia, just listen for now until you're familiar with the piece." As the orchestra began to play, Lucia sat with the borrowed violin on her lap, still trying to process what had just happened. She had won. Against all odds, against students with every advantage, she had proven herself through sheer talent and determination. Her first instinct was to text her father, but that would have to wait. For now, she closed her eyes and listened to the music surrounding her, music she would soon be part of. In the hallway outside, unseen by his daughter, Roberto Reyes stood with his mop forgotten in his hands, tears streaming down his face as he watched Lucia take her rightful place among the musicians. "Nothing in this world you cannot have if you work for it," he had always told her, and now finally she believed it too. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind for Lucia. Each day after finishing her regular classes, she would rush to Westlake for orchestra rehearsals, private lessons with Mrs. Harrington, and hours of practice in the school's soundproof rooms. Her father would clean nearby, sometimes pausing to listen outside the door, his face glowing with quiet pride. The scholarship had provided Lucia with a loaner violin that took her breath away the first time she played it. A restored Italian instrument with a warm, rich tone that responded to her touch like a living thing. After years of coaxing music from her second-hand violin, playing this instrument felt like finally speaking in her true voice. Not everything was perfect, of course. Some of the orchestra students, led by Tyler, continued to treat her like an outsider. They would switch to English when she approached their lunch table, though they knew she spoke perfect Spanish. They made comments about the charity case just loud enough for her to hear. Once she found her sheet music with crude drawings in the margins. But for every student like Tyler, there were others who accepted her presence with varying degrees of curiosity and respect. David, in particular, had become something of an ally, sharing his own marked-up sheet music and occasionally offering tips during sectional rehearsals. And Zoe, the cellist who had defended her that day in the hallway, made a point of sitting with Lucia during breaks. "Don't let Tyler get to you," Zoe advised after a particularly tense rehearsal where Lucia had struggled with a difficult passage, prompting snickers from Tyler's corner. "He's threatened because you're good, really good, and you didn't have to buy your way in like his family did with their donations." The spring showcase was now just days away. Posters hung throughout the school announcing the event, which would feature performances by various ensembles, with the full orchestra as the grand finale. Tickets were expensive, primarily bought by wealthy parents and alumni, with proceeds going to support Westlake's arts programs. Mrs. Harrington had pushed the orchestra relentlessly, demanding perfection from every section. The program included Brahms' Academic Festival Overture and Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet Fantasy Overture, challenging pieces that showcased the orchestra's technical abilities. And in a surprise announcement the week before, she had added a solo piece to the program. David Chen will perform the first movement of the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, accompanied by the orchestra, she had announced. And for the first time, we will also feature a second soloist. Lucia Reyes will perform Summer from Vivaldi's Four Seasons. The announcement had sent a buzz through the orchestra. 2 soloists was unusual, especially with one being so new to the program. Tyler had complained loudly after rehearsal that Lucia was only chosen because of diversity quotas. But even he couldn't deny that her playing had improved dramatically under Mrs. Harrington's tutelage, her natural talent now refined with proper technique. The night before the showcase, Lucia stayed late in the practice room working on a tricky passage in the Vivaldi that still gave her trouble. Outside, a spring storm had rolled in, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rumbled in the distance. When she finally packed up her violin, the school was eerily quiet. Most of the lights had been turned off, leaving only the security lamps casting long shadows down the hallways. She texted her father, who was working an extra shift at his second job tonight. cleaning offices downtown to help pay for her new music books and the dress she would wear tomorrow. Just leaving now. We'll take the bus. Don't worry. His reply came quickly. Be careful. Storm is bad. Love you. As Lucia walked toward the side exit, violin case in hand, she passed the main auditorium where tomorrow's performance would take place. The door was slightly ajar, a strip of light visible from inside. Curious, she peeked in. On the stage stood Tyler alone, practicing his orchestra parts with intense concentration. Without his usual audience of admirers, his face was different, focused, almost vulnerable. He played a difficult passage over and over, his frustration evident when he couldn't get it right. Lucia watched silently, surprised to see this side of him. For all his arrogance, Tyler clearly cared about the music and wanted to perform well tomorrow. As she was about to slip away, her phone chimed loudly with a weather alert. Tyler's head snapped up, his eyes finding her in the doorway. Spying on me now? He called out, his face immediately hardening back into its usual mask of disdain. No, I was just leaving, Lucia replied, embarrassed at being caught. Sorry to interrupt, she turned to go, but Tyler's voice stopped her. Wait. He hesitated, then asked reluctantly, That run in the development section of the Brahms, how are you fingering that? Lucia blinked in surprise. Was Tyler Brooks actually asking for her help? I use a third position shift here, she said, placing her case down and opening it to demonstrate. Mrs. Harrington showed me a trick for that passage. For the next 15 minutes, they worked on the troublesome section together, their mutual love of music temporarily overriding the social barriers between them. Tyler was still stiff and somewhat condescending, but he listened to her suggestions and even tried the fingering she demonstrated. You're not half bad, he finally admitted, though he couldn't quite bring himself to say thank you. For someone who learned from YouTube anyway. It wasn't exactly friendship, but it was something, a small crack in the wall that had stood between them. The next evening, Lucia stood backstage in her new dress, a simple but elegant blue gown that her father had insisted on buying despite the cost. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and for the first time in her life, she wore a touch of makeup, applied by Zoe, who had arrived early to help her prepare. Through the curtain, she could hear the audience filling the auditorium. Somewhere out there sat her father, who had taken the night off from both jobs to be here. Also in attendance, according to Mrs. Harrington, were representatives from several music schools and arts foundations, people with the power to open doors for talented young musicians. 5 minutes, everyone, Mrs. Harrington announced, moving through the backstage area where the orchestra members were tuning their instruments and adjusting their formal attire. Lucia's hands trembled slightly as she checked her violin one last time. Next to her, David was doing the same, his usual calm demeanor showing hints of pre-performance nerves. First time with a real audience? He asked, noticing her expression. Lucia nodded. I've only ever played for my dad and Mrs. Harrington. You'll be fine, David assured her. Just focus on the music, not the people. Once you start playing, everything else fades away. Mrs. Harrington gathered them for final instructions, her usual stern expression replaced by quiet intensity. Remember why we do this, she told them. Not for applause or recognition, but because music matters. It connects us to something larger than ourselves. Now go out there and play your hearts out. The orchestra filed onto the stage to polite applause. Lucia took her place in the second violin section, trying not to stare at the sea of faces in the audience. The lights were bright, making it difficult to make out individual people, but in the third row, she spotted her father, sitting somewhat stiffly in his good shirt, looking both nervous and immensely proud. The first half of the program went smoothly. The orchestra performed the Brahms with precision and energy, even the troublesome passage flowing seamlessly. When intermission came, Lucia felt a surge of confidence. The worst of her nerves had settled, replaced by excitement for her solo. After the break, David performed his Tchaikovsky concerto to enthusiastic applause, his playing both technically brilliant and emotionally nuanced. As he took his final bow, Lucia knew she was next. She stood from her chair and moved to the soloist's position at the front of the stage, her heart pounding but her grip on her violin steady. Mrs. Harrington gave her a subtle nod of encouragement before raising her baton. The orchestra began the introduction to Summer, and then everything fell away except the music. Lucia's entrance was confident and strong, her tone singing out over the accompanying strings. The hours of practice, the years of determination, the lifetime of loving music. It all poured through her fingers and into the violin. She played not just with technical skill, but with her whole heart, telling the story of the piece as Mrs. Harrington had taught her. The relentless heat of summer, the gathering storm, the struggle against nature's power. When she reached the cadenza, her fingers flew across the strings with newfound precision and freedom. The final notes soared to the ceiling of the auditorium, pure and true. There was a moment of complete silence when she finished. Then the audience erupted in applause, rising to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. Through the stage lights, Lucia could see her father standing, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. As she took her bow, she caught sight of Tyler in the orchestra, clapping along with the others. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a small nod of genuine respect. After the concert, as audience members mingled with performers in the lobby, Lucia found herself surrounded by people offering congratulations. Mrs. Harrington introduced her to several important visitors, including the director of a prestigious summer music program, who pressed a card into her hand, murmuring something about exceptional talent and full scholarship. But the moment Lucia would remember most clearly came later, when the crowds had thinned and she stood with her father near the exit, her violin case in one hand and a bouquet of flowers someone had given her in the other. "Your mother would have been so proud," Roberto said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "She always said you had music in your soul." "I couldn't have done it without you, Papa," Lucia replied, thinking of the sacrifices he had made, the extra jobs, the second-hand violin, the unwavering belief in her potential when no one else saw it. As they walked to the truck, Lucia glanced back at Westlake Academy, its windows glowing in the night. 6 months ago, she had been invisible here, just the janitor's daughter with a mop and a secret dream. Now she belonged, not because anyone had given her a place, but because she had earned it. Note by painstaking note. The scholarship, the summer program invitation, the respect of her peers, these were all beginnings, not endings. There would be challenges ahead, more barriers to break, more music to master. But tonight, walking beside her father under the spring stars, Lucia knew with certainty that anything was possible. All you needed was heart, hard work, and the courage to play your own song even when others doubted you could.